This episode is brought to you by Google Gemini. With the Gemini app, you can talk live and have a real-time conversation with an AI assistant. It's great for all kinds of things, like if you want to practice for an upcoming interview, ask for advice on things to do in a new city, or brainstorm creative ideas. And by the way, this script was actually read by Gemini. Download the Gemini app for iOS and Android today. Must be 18 plus to use Gemini Live.
More Chumba Casino fan mail. Love this. It says, Dear Ryan, I love Chumba Casino. There's so much fun. I love the wild ride from the social slots to the Slingo to jackpots quicker than a 6-time real spin. Everybody's finding their fun at Chumba Casino. Why don't you find out for yourself? Head to ChumbaCasino.com and enjoy hundreds of casino-style games for free with your welcome bonus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 500, Too Much, Too Soon. Last time, as the Rzhev salient was being attacked, the Soviets created another headache for the invaders by trying to approach Vyazma from the southeast. The why of this was to push Army Group Center's center section back to be on par with its wings, which had already been bent back. But as we have seen, the Soviet penetration that was trying to reach Vyazma was soon attacked from the north and south. The question was, could General Zhukov help this penetration with supplies and reinforcements before its leading troops were cut off by the Germans' pincer attack? For if the Soviets took Vyazma, Army Group Center's defensive line would be threatened. This could not be allowed to happen. Problem was, Vyazma was not just another Soviet city. During the spring and summer of 1941, Moscow had ordered that Vyazma be ringed with defensive works, which included fields of fire. Now, these were working for the Germans. So as Colonel Belov's 1st Guards Cavalry Corps and General Efremov's 4 divisions from the 33rd Army tried to approach the edges of Vyazma, all they earned was more dead. The two commanders spoke regularly via the radio, and they quickly realized they were in the same boat. First, that day's conversation would start with who had been killed or wounded, and the list was never short. It started with the commander of the 96th Cavalry Regiment, then the commander of the 2nd Guards Cavalry Division, Colonel Olesovsky. He was wounded. This was besides the dozens of men lost in the previous day's fighting. But even worse, after 10 days of fending off the pincer attacks, both Soviet armies found themselves getting low on ammunition. Zhukov had promised much, but delivered very little, practically nothing. Considering this, the two commanders decided to bring their units together to form one continuous front. That way, at least their inner flanks would be mutually protected. But headquarters, i.e. Zhukov, would not hear of this. War is replete with men in the field screaming that their superiors have no idea of what's going on, and it was the same here. Of course, that led to the saying and practice of, trust the commander on the scene. But that was not possible in Stalin's Russia, nor, it has to be said, most times, in Hitler's Germany. And sure enough, as the two armies were not allowed to support each other while both watched their supplies dwindle, the Germans struck. Here's how Colonel Belov put it. Our reconnaissance reported the appearance of new enemy units in the front line. On 10 February, the enemy struck at 75th Cavalry Division and surrounded it. To free the division from encirclement, we had to withdraw forces from other sectors. The Germans took advantage of this and launched attacks where we had weakened our defenses. After a stubborn battle, 75th Cavalry Division escaped from the enemy ring. We saved our comrades, but the group as a whole was thrown back 12 to 15 kilometers from Vyazma. There was no longer any thought of attacking the city. Meanwhile, the trapped Soviet men of the 29th Army of General Konev's Kalinin Front, that was to the west of Rzhev, had been told to fight their way back to the north to escape General Modul's trap. But as much as the Germans were tired from enemy units north of them coming down and trying to attack them, they still managed to stop the equally weak 29th Army from heading any further north. To this, Conan then told them, "Oh, forget north. Now I want you to head to the southwest." Konev's idea was for what remained of the 29th Army to head towards Smolensk, as the 39th Army from the Northwestern Front was currently pushing that way. Smolensk is just over 90 miles or 144 kilometers to the southwest of Rzhev, so this would be quite a task. But the trapped men were well motivated. As orders are orders, the 29th Army moved out, fighting all along the way. And when not fighting the enemy, they battled Mother Nature. Both adversaries took a toll on the 29th Army. Still, days later, parts of the 29th started meeting up with the 39th. As one nurse of the 39th would note, of the men of the 29th that reached them, not a single one of them was not wounded in some way.
This episode is brought to you by AWS. Amazon Q Business is the new generative AI assistant from AWS. Many tasks can make business slow, like wading through mud. Help! Luckily, there's a faster, easier, less messy choice. Amazon Q can securely understand your business data to help you streamline tasks, like summarizing quarterly results or doing complex analyses in no time. Q got this. Learn what Amazon Q Business can do for you at aws.com/learn more.
Back to Colonel Belov and his 1st Guards Cavalry Corps not being allowed to work closer with Efremov, Belov decided to, as most good leaders do, make his own luck. And here, Belov had to read into what he wasn't told not to do. As the majority of what remained of the 8th Airborne Brigade was trapped near the town of Salevo, located about 17 miles or 27 kilometers southwest of Vyazma, Belov decided to push that way to link up with them. After all, safety in numbers. The paratroopers had landed about 45 miles or 72 kilometers southeast of Semlevo and had fought their way north, trying to do their part to encircle much of the northern half of Army Group Center. But the Germans had reacted quickly, and now the paratroopers were the ones that were surrounded. But hoping to turn a negative into a positive, Belov and company set out. If all went well, not only could his men and the paratroopers help each other, but together they might be able to take the town of Semlevo, which could prove to be the first domino of Army Group Center's fall. Hoping to be more clever than fierce, Belov's division, augmented by the 114th Ski Battalion donated by Efremov, hoped to sneak up on Salevo and take it by surprise. But the deep snow put a stop to that. No, they would have to do this the old-fashioned way. So the 1st Guards left their vehicles behind and tried to advance on foot, with the skiers supporting them. But the Germans had numerous mortars and were ready. After losing too many men too fast, Belov had them fall to the ground and try to crawl forward. The snow made this painful, but not as painful as being torn apart by shrapnel. To be sure, the 1st Guards 107mm mortars and artillery tried to take out the German guns, but by the time they found the range, they were down to their last few shells, which had to be husbanded in case of emergency. As he had been doing since day one, Belov and his men from the Soviet 33rd Army paid a high price, but they managed to reach and take control of Salevo's southeast corner. But it looked like that was as far as they could go, given the enemy's numerous machine guns, artillery, and tanks working together seamlessly. Yet this was not the only avenue of advance for the attack. Meanwhile, the 11th and 131st Cavalry Regiments approached the town from the east. On their immediate left was the 75th Light Cavalry Division, which crept closer. The Germans, though, were ready, but the men of the 75th were determined. This just might work, which is when Belov was told by his radio operators that a Major Steinbach, obviously the garrison commander of Salevo, had requested support. The major told whoever was on the other end that Semlevo was surrounded. Belov wished that was true, but he knew that the enemy was now spooked. The German forces holding Vyazma, again about 17 miles or 27 kilometers to the northeast of this town, sent 2 battalions with tanks to Sarajevo. But even before they moved out, enemy planes from Vyazma were already hitting the Russians near the town. This type of fighting went on for a few days, but on February 15th, as Sarajevo received a fair number of reinforcements, the Germans went over to the offensive. Now it was the Russians repelling attacks. Things did not look good, but also on that day, the survivors of 8th Airborne Brigade smashed through the German line and were able to join the 1st Guards. That was the good news. The bad news was that there was only 380 of them. But back to the good news, that's when Belov told the airborne commander, "My cavalry gathered up about 200 of your paratroopers that were scattered during the drop. Please take them under your command." But back to the bad news, clearly Belov and Efremov did not have the manpower nor equipment to take and hold Selimov. So the attack was called off. But one does not get to Zhukov's position without knowing how to play the game. And though Soviet Russia had lost over 1 million men by this point, Zhukov knew that he still had to have something to show for being given additional fronts and additional responsibility. His ultimate goal was to rescue those Soviet units trapped near Vyazma. But it was not a question simply of fighting their way there. No, the Germans were now active in the area. He would have to weaken them before making his move. So he ordered Lieutenant General Ivan Bolden's 50th Army to drive west, which would put them on a path towards Yuknov, about 45 miles or 72 kilometers to the southeast of Vyazma. If Yuknov and the area around it could be secured, then at least approaching Vyazma from the southeast would be somewhat easier. But to even give this opening move a better chance of success, Zhukov would have the rest of 4th Airborne Corps dropped in, but in an arc west of Yuknov. They would drive to the eastern edge of Yuknov, while the 50th Army drove west and tried to make for the city's northeast corner. They would meet up, take the city, and then drive on Vyazma. But there was one problem. Not wanting to repeat the mistake of the last airdrop, Zhukov wanted more planes, and he got them. Well, he got a few more. This time, he would have 70 planes, which meant, again, multiple drops for each plane would be needed, meaning the entire airdrop would take longer than desired, giving the Germans more time to react. But no commander worth his salt waits for perfection. Nothing is perfect, certainly in war. The operation got underway on February 18th. And it was far from textbook. Firstly, only a percentage of the men were dropped that first day, and it was over a scattered area. Again, not best for self-defense. Still, all the airborne troops, about 7,300 of them, were on the ground by February 23rd. Not surprising, about 1/3 of these men did not show up for assembly. Thus, this force was weakened from the start. Not that those missing men were dead, just lost or dropped somewhere else. Most of them would walk around for days until meeting up with partisans or some more established army unit. The good news for Belov was, one group of the paratroopers reached him in his command, and so he forthwith put them with the 8th Airborne Brigade to strengthen their numbers. The good news was that the 8th was now close to being full strength. The bad news? They all lacked ammunition. And just in case any of these Soviet troops in the forward area forgot about enemy fighter planes, on the last day of the drops, the 4th Airborne Corps commander, Major General Rzhev, was killed, while most of his staff was wounded. All this by a single strafing fighter. As his chief of staff, Colonel Alexander Kazakhin, was mostly unscratched, he took command of the airborne soldiers. With this done, Belov took his men a bit to the west and cut the road that connected Smolensk with Vyazma.
This is an ad from BetterHelp. This holiday season, do something for a special person in your life. You. Give yourself the gift of better mental health. BetterHelp Online Therapy connects you with a qualified therapist via phone, video, or live chat. It's convenient and affordable and can be done from the comfort of your own home. Having someone to talk to is truly a gift, especially during the holidays. Visit BetterHelp.com to learn more and save 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com.
This latest airdrop was not done in a vacuum, however, and Zhukov wasn't the only one renewing his attacks against the enemy. As this latest airborne operation was unfolding, the Kalinin front was busy trying to capture the towns of Olino and Bely. Olino is about 30 miles or 48 kilometers due west of Rzhev along the main highway. Bely is about 20 miles south of Olino. But as the Germans were somewhat rested, again receiving supplies, not to mention reinforcements, these Soviet attacks quickly went nowhere. No problem. The dead were removed, new men were put into their place, and the attack set off again. This time, Major General Vorkushkov and his 22nd Army did make it south enough to reach Bely. What they could not do was kick the enemy out of the town. Alas, the other Soviet armies, also trying to come south, just west of the original Rzhev salient, the 30th, 39th, and 31st Armies, were no more successful. But it could be argued that all their attempts together is what allowed the 22nd Army to reach Bely in the first place. Another Soviet unit to take advantage of all this fighting just west of Rzhev was Major General Sergei Sokolov's 11th Cavalry Corps. They were able to push further south, so they were truly in the rear of Army Group Center when they got the order to meet up with Belov's 1st Guards Cavalry Corps. Thus, the 11th Cavalry Corps made its way even further south, while Belov's men pushed west. And yet, the reinforced Germans in the area not only managed to push the 11th Cavalry Corps back to the north with heavy casualties, when the two Soviet forces were only a few miles apart, they then turned to face Belov's men and gave him and his a good thrashing, again delivering heavy casualties. Clearly, the Soviets still had a ways to go in terms of coordinating on a large scale. On the other hand, the Germans, once they learned of this latest airdrop, not only fortified their positions even further, they had already made plans to support each other if one of them was to be attacked. No, they didn't have the manpower, equipment, or fuel to go hunting for these various enemy armies in their rear, but they felt confident that they could be dealt with once they, the Russians, came to them. And so far, this was proving to be correct. As the sun rose on February 24th, Colonel Kazankin, acting commander of the 4th Airborne Corps, pushed further south, and more from surprise than anything else, managed to take the town of Vertekhovo, about 30 miles due south of Vyazma, and equal distant between Kaluga and Smolensk. And then, trying to stay unpredictable, they went north, not south, for about a dozen miles, and ran into an enemy supply train near the town of Agra. So, rearmed, they then turned back south, went about 25 miles, and attacked two other towns, Posochina and Klyushki. The latter town was officially taken by the 9th Airborne Brigade. Clearly, Moscow was serious about unraveling the rear area of Army Group Center with all these various forces in the area. And it was this latest victory that seemingly was about to cut Army Group Center in twain. As these airborne troops were running wild when they had supplies, the Soviet 50th Army was trying to make contact with them coming from the east. Led by Lieutenant General Ivan Boldin, 50th Army had liberated Kaluga and now looked to push the enemy further to the west or cut the roads behind Army Group Center and thus trap them. But there was a problem. For now, 50th Army, though making progress, was coming along slowly, whereas the airborne troops already in German territory moved faster, coming to the east. This allowed the Germans in this part of the line to focus on the airmen first with their artillery before having to truly worry about the 50th Army. The airmen who had been running wild, causing trouble, were now given trouble and forced back north by the end of February. Again, they, like everyone else, lacked larger weapons, and the ones they did have were running low on supplies. Not that life was easy for Army Group Center. By this point, between airborne forces, cavalry, and some regular Army forces, there were about 29,000 Soviet troops, along with who knows how many partisans behind the German line of Army Group Center. Yes, they were all short on food, ammunition, and heavy weapons. But that's what also made them dangerous. They would have to take what they needed, and the only ones who had what they needed was the enemy. But during all this hell, 1st Guards Commander Belov found himself fighting Zhukov just as much as he was fighting the Germans. Problem was, the Soviet general back in Moscow was equally known for shooting those who gave him trouble. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So I don't have any new members, but there's just, I'm just going to read out some randomly chosen members' names to thank them for supporting this show. I really do appreciate it. Let's see here. There's Brian McNulty. I just think that's a cool name. Let's see here. Richard Manzella, Douglas Mogul, another good name, and Priscilla Forney. So those are just randomly members that I picked. I'll probably try to do that from now on just to thank these people because they really do make a difference around here. And as far as donations, I guess people are feeling the Christmas spirit. So let's see here. There's Jeff Dempsey, Duncan Dick, Daryl Nesbitt, and Brad Wolf. So again, thank you for those who have donated. It really makes things a lot easier around here. I don't spend the money on my family. I would never, they can get their own podcast. Joking. I'm joking, but it really does help around here. It is greatly appreciated. So I hope you all have a safe and happy holiday. And I'll see you as soon as I can with the next episode. There will be at least one more before Christmas, if not two, because, I'm just trying to get these out as soon as we can and then go on to Army Group North and Army Group South and kind of tie it all together and see how this slowly gets turned around. Because it's still, a year or two or whatever before the Soviets can truly push back to the West. So we'll see how it goes. Take care, everyone.